Anyway, enjoy your day. Enjoy your day. Stefan, good morning, sir. Guten Tag. Nice to see you. And everybody else as well. So if you're going to put your cameras on and use the virtual background, if not, that's perfectly fine. It's nice to see you. On the screen, just to get going before we kick off into the main event, there's a question there, and the question is, what do you think are going to be the non-risk elements that are impacting the business, the non-risk items that we're going to be talking about today? So so if you can put on the chat, please, what you think are some of the important non-traditional risk elements that are facing business today. And then that'll get us cracking. The chat is I think it should be at the bottom of your screen if you're looking around for it on the control bar at the bottom of the screen. So if you can just if you can answer that question, or indeed just to test the chat, if you can say hello, I'm from Hamburg, if that's where you are, Stefan, or Riga, if that's Elga, where you are. So hello, I'm from such and such a place. All right, so we can see where people are. I know because we have people in Sofia and Budapest, and as you see there, Brussels and other places, all as in the UK. People from many different places. So let's get a feel for where we are, and you keep moving around, Stefan. They'll
actually quite some people from the Netherlands. That's
yes,
good.
Yeah. We get there's quite a few people now coming from Belgium and the Netherlands. Yeah, which is very nice to see. We have a gentleman there from the Cameroon. Good morning, sir. Very nice to see you. Okay, yeah, and also if anybody wants to have a go at the question that we're putting up there, what are the non-traditional risks that are facing businesses today, and what are we going to be talking about in this session? So, okay, I think as it's just gone 8:30 check time, so we'll get started. So just a quick little bit of housekeeping to get started. So my name is Mark Harrison. I'm the founder and chief exec of Callisto Grand. I'm delighted to be sharing this session today with Afia van Kraayen from Moody's, who's up there in top left-hand corner from me. So there you are. There's Afia. We're recording this session, by the way. So it's been recorded from a few minutes ago. This will be submitted to our accrediting agency called CPD, Continuous Professional Development. And in a few weeks' time, you'll get a certificate from CPD acknowledging that you've taken 1 hour of your time to be here and to share what we're doing today for your personal development, right? So these CPD certificates are worthwhile to keep. Okay, so what else have we got then? Oh yes, the video recording afterwards will only be available in the Callisto Grand members section. So if you'd like to see this again, we'll basically request that you become members, which is very, you just contact us at info@creditce.eu and we'll show you how you can become members. All right then, so let's get, oh yeah, I should stress that in the credit clinic here, this is an interactive session, right? So it's not a typical webinar where Afia will be leading the discussion for the next hour or so, or myself. We're going to be asking you guys to give your opinions all the way through, to share your comments, your observations, if you agree or not with what we're saying. You can actually say it, so you can put your hand up and we'll invite you in and you can talk about what it is you want to share, or you can put it on the chat, and as much as possible we'll take your chat comments and we'll put them to Afia and she can respond. But I say this is a round table, it's an open event, so hopefully we want lots of discussion from everybody to comment on each other's comments and so on. Okay, all right then, so in today's credit clinic, we're diving into non-traditional risks that might not always show up on your financial statements, but trust us, ignoring them is like skipping your annual checkup. and it will come back to haunt your P&L and your balance sheet. For example, did you know that the average cost of a ransomware attack is somewhere in the region of $4.5 million to a company for a ransomware attack? So at the end of today, you'll never forget to take your daily financial vitamins again. You'll cleanse your bloodstream and avoid clogging those financial veins and arteries. So I will spare you any more of these puns, which I got from my very fine friend ChatGPT yesterday. So I'm not taking the blame for them. I'll spare you the rest of them. And it's my real honor and pleasure now to hand over to Afia. So all yours, ma'am. Take it away.
Perfect. Thank you, Mark. And I mean, being in this clinic, a little shout out to my parents who will be pleased to know that, you know, at least for 1 hour, I may have worked in a clinic, but, you know, that's probably the closest I'll get to actually becoming a doctor. So I
got the handwriting. I have terrible handwriting. That's as close
I mean,
as
same. Actually, I was going to be a dentist, but then 18 years ago, it's literally been 18 years. That's very long if you say it out loud. I chose to become a business engineer. So anyway, long story short, I'm working as an industry practice lead today for credits. I'm particularly focusing on trade credits, and I'm responsible for Europe and Africa at Moody's Analytics. When we say Moody's, people say ratings, which is true up to a certain point. I'm actually working for the division called Moody's Analytics, where we provide financial intelligence and analytical tools, essentially to make sure that companies or our customers can make better and faster decisions. So this is not to be confused with Moody's Investor Service, which is our sister company, and they are the ones taking care of the research and the ratings. Together we form Moody's Corporation, and if you're ever in New York at World Trade Center 7, feel free to drop by and say hello. But that's enough about me. I'm really pleased to co-host this clinic today. As you can see on the screen, we are going to discuss some of the what we call non-traditional risk factors. But before we move on, Esther, if you can please have the polling question on the screen, just to understand a little bit who we have, let's say, in front of us. It's a very easy, straightforward question.
Is it visible?
It is visible.
Thank
and
Yep.
If we give it a couple more seconds to probably have the results on the screen. If you're wondering why I asked this question, I'm actually going to do a presentation at the conference next month as well, where we will also touch on this. And obviously, I will take some of the results into account when preparing for that presentation. Ashra, I don't know if you're sharing the results on the screen. I cannot see them.
Yeah, we've got...
Not yet, because I'm
sorry.
still waiting for a couple of people to respond.
Okay, perfect.
Just 5 more seconds, please.
Okay.
Perfect.
So primarily manufacturing.
Okay,
And
so
tech
closing
and
the
pharma.
poll now
Okay.
and sharing the results.
Well, there's still, that's a good distribution of that.
Okay.
Perfect. All right.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Perfect. We can move to the next one. Awesome. So for those who actually joined my session last year at the conference in Budapest, they may recognize this slide. It's essentially a short overview of some of the major shocks that we faced over the last couple of years. And so although these shocks were pretty different, obviously, from one another, there was one thing that they had in common. It's that shock after shock, companies seem to better understand the actual importance of the trade credit department within their organization. So with each shock, what we saw is that a company eventually turned, or the leaders of the company eventually turned to the trade credit department to understand the impact a shock may have or had on their business, on their profits, and essentially on the future outlook of the company. So for example, in Brexit, we were contacted because companies wanted to understand the exposure the company had with regards to UK customers and how this could potentially disrupt the supply chain. During COVID pandemic, of course, no information was available on the impact of the pandemic on the financial health of companies. You know, that entire sectors were shut down for a couple of months. So that was really navigating through what we call, you know, blindly through the storm. And it was again up to credit need teams to find new ways, you know, to assign credits to support a company continuing to do business, to maintain their sales or even grow. 2 years later, of course, that's not very far away from now. In February 2022, the leaders again turned to credit teams, and also, to be fair, to a certain extent, also to compliance teams, to understand which customers were Russian-owned, how much exposure the company had to Russia. And whilst the energy crisis was obviously following the war, companies wanted to understand whether long-term healthy customers were resilient enough to the increased energy prices. So again, this question was asked to credit teams. And it's not so much about will we have a next shock, it's rather than when will that next shock hit us. And as you can see, it's following closely and closely. So any shocks and disruption that we now see are actually overlapping. And what we see is that we really are in those turbulent and really uncertain times. At Moody's, we call this the new era. It's the era of exponential risk. As again, the world has grown incredibly complex, and you see supply chain failures everywhere. I mean, try now order a new car that has certain chips in it, and good luck getting it in less than 2 years. We have the further geopolitical tensions. Obviously, Russia, Ukraine, China, North Korea. There's always a bit of uncertainty there. We have the U.S. elections coming next year as well. We have sanctions, security issues, and then obviously the extreme weather events, again, combined with economic uncertainty, social unrest. So we are more than ever linked by technology, and trades and risk really no longer exist in isolation. And that's really something that we are seeing more, and now more than ever. Organizations and nations obviously are also linked. So again, it's really about anticipating and adopting new ways to look at risk. The upside, of course, to this story is, again, that we've seen that credit departments transformed actually from more back office functions to really strategic departments within organizations, and that your function essentially becomes more important than ever in uncertain times. So the big risk factors that we are now starting to consider, at least that I would like to discuss today, is cyber risk, it's natural disaster or climate risk, and it's ESG risk as well. We'll also have at the end some insights in how we can leverage artificial intelligence to faster grab a hold of risk. The only thing I added that is because you nowadays cannot have a presentation without starting to talk about AI. So I put that in there as well for you guys. Again, this is a very interactive session, so I'm really hoping to spark some discussions. Before we move into cyber risk, there is another polling question before we proceed. So Esther, yeah, thank you. If you can have that one on the screen, that'd be awesome. And if we can have yeah, awesome.
Okay, yeah, so there's 2 questions there. Wow.
All right. Let's give it a couple more seconds.
Be interested to know on the response to the first question. Maybe people can start to put that into the chat. As I saying, like that there's a higher number that are taking cyber risk into consideration. I'd be interested to know how that actually manifests itself. What does that actually mean? Yeah, so maybe we can discuss that as well. But yeah, is it more like money put onto like a reserve or something just in case, or obviously investment in the technology? It'd be interesting to know how that actually physically represents itself. And an awful lot of people know about companies that have suffered a cyber attack. Yeah, so okay, is that good for you, Afia? You got plenty there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm really curious for the people that responded yes in the second question. Obviously, in the first piece, please also elaborate in the chat on what you take into consideration and how this is done. As for the second one, if there's anything you'd like to share on that, also in terms of outcome, potential impact, etc., that would be really helpful if you can already start doing that on the chat. And obviously, after there's now one slide on cyber, and then obviously we can open up the floor for further discussion.
Okay, good. So already we got Gabor in Budapest that said there's been more attempts at fraud. So I think as you go through, I think we'll probably come back to that. Yeah, I imagine that's one of the biggest elements that you're gonna talk about. Yeah, so we'll
absolutely
we'll stay with that. So great. Okay, all right then. So so in the area of this cyber risk, I know you got a couple of examples here. Yeah.
Yeah, Absolutely. So the example that you'll see on the slide, it just took a couple of snapshots from articles that were published some years ago. So it's the example of ASCO that was hit very hard by a ransomware attack back in June 2019. So again, it's ASCO, so it's not like Rex Car Shop around the corner where someone clicked an old link. It's a major company that is actually providing parts to the airline sector. It's an important supplier to companies for likes of Boeing, Airbus, etc. And in Belgium alone, they represent already 1,500 people. And due to the attack, the company actually had to shut down for several months. They were down to pencils and paper, etc., to communicate. And it actually took them more than 9 months to fully recover, which was actually right in time before they were hit by COVID. So if you talk about exponential risk, again, there is this constant overlap of let's say, of shocks happening, of disruptions happening. But looking at the financial impact this attack had on the company, so we heard Mark say in the introduction that the average cost of an attack is around 4.5 million. In the US, that actually will go up to more than 9 million. So that's doubling in a couple of years' time. ASCO had to pay in 2019 more than 20 million in consultancy fees to get their systems back up and running, and essentially also be better protected for the future. Actually, a year prior to the attack, it was announced that the company would be acquired by Spirit for approximately $650 million. And actually, Spirit lowered the offer to $420 million because of all the reputational damage that had been done after the ransomware attack. And eventually, the negotiations got even stuck and the deal was unsuccessfully terminated. Even looking also at the probability of default of that company prior to the attack, they were around 0.5%. And they saw an increase up to even 12% at some point. And even very close to now, just last week, you may have seen this in the press, that the news about the MGM resorts in Las Vegas, they're the ones that are owning the Bellagio and many other resorts and casinos. They were also hit by a cyber incident. They had to disclose this to the Security and Exchange Commission. And customers were essentially unable to access their rooms. As you can imagine, digital key access cards that stopped working, ATM machines were no longer working, the slot machines were no longer operating, and which you can imagine, all of these are pretty crucial within their sector. MGM is estimated to currently miss out on revenue for between 4 to 8 million on a daily basis. And this was all because one of their employees got impersonated. So using information that hackers found on social media, they could actually trick their help desk at MGM into providing duplicate access information. So we know that with AI, I think we discussed that in the last session, Mark, that they can now even copy your voice and everything, but also what people are sharing on social media, etc., can easily be used on by hackers. So next time someone is asking you on Facebook, what was the name of your first cat or pets, just know that in many cases like this is also a security question, and people are actually using that information not because they want to know what type of cat person you are. A hacker attack or a cyber attack is happening every 39 seconds at the moment. Sure. I saw some of the companies here that are in the healthcare sector, and the healthcare sector is currently the top target for ransomware attacks. Also know that 92% was delivered via email. So again, please make sure that if you look for emails, etc., don't, you know the drill, don't click on any funny links, but it gets really good. We also have those phishing attempts, where they do like fake phishing attempts at work, and it's just very good in terms of what they can do now. But with this for cyber risk, I really want to open the floor. Again, really shout out to the people that commented, etc. If you can please speak up, because I really would like to understand how you incorporate this at the moment into your analysis. If there's anything you can share about customers, etc., or your own company, maybe that was hit, that would be great.
I think there's been some belting stuff coming through the chat already, though. Lots and lots of different comments, and I'm going to, Martin, Kirby, I'll come to you in a second. And I was just going to say, I know somebody also mentioned banks in the chat just now, and I know in the Czech Republic, I think at least 2 of the major banks were hacked about 2 or 3 weeks ago, because it meant, like, from my point of view, our company, we couldn't move any transactions out. We couldn't make any payments or stuff like that. Some people might say that's a good thing, but in general, the whole kind of, two major banks, international banks in the Czech Republic were prevented from operating for almost a week, right? So it's very real. There's very clear and present danger what's going on. Martin, you made a great comment there about initially you said about not doing this, but then you're saying about the cost element of it. What's your experience of it then? I mean, what are we talking about the cost, and where does that show, that cost?
I think it shows in a couple of. Good morning. I'm sorry I was late as well, so apologies to everybody. I just got called to the office early. I think the cost of it really, needs to. I think the cost of it really needs to be considered when you are working initially with your CRAs, and making sure that the information that they pass across it covers that as well. But I think you've got to really join. You've got to really join with your existing executives and certainly start to work with your chief information officer in our case would be as well to do that. But you've got to really consider that cost is money well spent for me initially, to make sure that you are trading with organisations that can comply with what you require. I mean, just going through those, I just made a quick list of, data security, real-time monitoring, and just making the model integrity as well.
And is it something that you ask of your customers? Because obviously you're sending data to them, and they're sending data back either through email or payments and so on. Is there now a greater focus on the sort of the integrity of your customers? That they're safe. You're going to trade with them. Is that like part of the onboarding?
Yeah, we will only talk to them through our own app unless they request differently. So they have to make a choice on how they want to communicate with us. So that is that. I think also practically from a point of view is that we will move shortly into a model where we won't allow any devices within the workplace for agents that are speaking to customers. To keep that really, because you see so many stories of agents taking photographs of screens, and that may not be, certainly couldn't get any financial information from any of our screens, but there is still take a photograph of that screen, that customer, that data has a value in that market if you want to sell that on. We're not in that market because we're a water retailer, so I think you have to start at home and do that, and engage with the customer and say, how do you want us to engage with you? Our preferences through our My Business stream, and then through any of those methods that we know are secure. So yes, yes, that's what we would do.
Thanks, Martin. And I think the significant thing there, and thinking about it from a credit order to cash point of view, and something that we talk about a lot in our training, that all of us working in order to cash are responsible for the company's profits. And one of the things we describe, like we're talking about here, is there's a lot more cost in the business now, which is not all being passed on through the sales figures to customers, right? So profit margins are already being squeezed, and now there's all these extra costs as a result of things like this and other things we'll talk about. So that's why what we do are getting more and more important, because bills have to be paid on time because the costs are just going up and up and up. So sorry, back to you, Afia.
Awesome, probably. Should we close cyber for now, or?
Yeah, I think we can.
Okay,
I'm sure
perfect.
it'll come back. I'm sure it'll come
back.
Yeah,
sorry, I'm just going to read through the chat questions, but to the chat comments, but I'll look at it after the session. It's really interesting. Thank you so much all for sharing.
There is some great stuff there, and I suppose then the next one, with the next voting question to lead into the next section, is on this climate risk.
Yeah,
right, so
exactly.
Again, similar to last time. So, okay. Okay. So that's pretty even this time, kind of 50-50. Yeah, sort of. If it's been taken.
Can you share the results on the screen? We can't see the results as of yet.
Okay, you see it now?
Yeah,
so
we can see it now.
It's 50-50 in both, really. So more or less, isn't it?
Okay.
Is it in the strategy, and our customers aware of it. So okay, so again in the chat, if you can share your experiences of how you're taking a climate risk into consideration within your own risk strategies, and also any examples you've got of customers being exposed to something that's happening due to climate risk or natural disasters, as it says there. So, okay, Afia.
Perfect. If we can move to the next slide. Awesome.
My favorite slide, this one. I love this.
All right. So now we go back to 2006, actually. If you all remember, we had Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth documentary coming out, and that really divided the audience back then. So we had a significant part of people that were convinced that global warming, climate change was a real threat. And then we had this other large group of people that claimed that, global warming was a joke the moment that they saw the first season snowflake was about to hit the ground. There was no global warming, otherwise you wouldn't have any snow. But today we can't even keep track of the different, major events that are happening. We have floods, we have droughts, we have fires, we have diseases, we have the ground shaking, trembling everywhere. We have that extreme weather. It is there. It's not going to get any better. The question is, of course, what does this have to do with credit risk? So what we can see is that climate-related events can actually directly damage a company's infrastructure or assets, and that's not a surprise. Looking at the repair or replacement costs of this can have a substantial impact on the funds of a company, again, impacting the company's short-term liquidity. And there is obviously this increased cost of, for example, insurance premiums that we see, or higher borrowing costs, which again can directly affect or impact your cash flow. We see obviously the overall macroeconomic impact. We've seen the food prices increase very significantly. I think we discussed that last time as well, or to one of the sessions that we had, Mark. We see climate refugees. We see the overall impact truly on the economic health, which then again is going to impact companies within that region. And there are obviously also the supply chain disruptions that may extend payment cycles. This could have a snowball effect on your other suppliers, which then eventually can also impact or affect companies to meet any obligations. And we also are going to see this what we call shift in industry dynamics. And this is especially affecting smaller players, where we see, you have the survival of the fittest and most resilient companies. So we need to keep an eye out on if we're doing business with some smaller players, if they are resilient enough to overcome this. So one of the things, and this is where I'm referring to the slide, and this is actually indeed very neat what we have done, is that this was actually coming from a supply chain tool, but we're now starting to use this as well within credits. So we created kind of a heat map of climate-related events, and it's not just so much about just the natural disasters, but all kinds of disruptions that we see. And you can actually put your customers, for example, on there and then look at past and potential future events. So we can even go up to the year 2100 to see, for example, how sea levels will rise, what we expect the temperature to do. You may all know that very annoying song from 20 years ago about the year 3000. Nothing has changed, but we all live underwater. I mean, for some people in some areas, that is actually going to be, or potentially going to be, the reality. So what you see here on the screen is, again, this is, for example, let's say this chart of the representation of all your customers. You can then see in the legend how we can see all the potential events and then the potential, let's say, disruption this may have. Esther, if we can move to the next slide. Yeah. So there again, these are just a couple of, the print is probably very small, but this is all about wildfires, earthquakes, any floods, etc. So this is again seeing how companies within your, let's say, or customers within your portfolio could potentially be affected by these kinds of events. Which brings me to the question. I see there is something already going on the chat, like, is this something you're currently looking at? Is this something you're taking into account? Really encourage the people on the chat or on the polling that said yes to please, let's say, explain what they are currently doing or what they see in terms of impact. People that said no, just also keen to get your thoughts about, is this something you're going to implement? Is this something you're currently looking at? You will be looking at.
Yeah, and there's already been a couple of responses there already, talking about events in India, and of course the last couple of weeks we've seen Libya and Morocco, the terrible events there. And I think from one of the main points we really want to share here is that what we're talking about here, isn't somebody else's problem. All right, there's we talk about this a fair bit in our certificate, our learning program, and we're talking about credit risk here. Yeah, and for everybody who's in collections and so on, we need to be thinking about where are our goods going, right? Where are they physically going to, right? And and if they are going to places that have physical risk, like we're describing here, or the other risks we said at the beginning, whether it's geopolitical risk, being like riots and things like that, this isn't something that we can keep quiet about. When we leave here today, hopefully you'll all go back to your offices and say, what is our risk policy on all these things that AFI has been bringing up, right? And because if there's a situation where a customer is in one of these places, they're not going to be able to pay, right? Or maybe there are ways that we can actually help and support them. There's many facets to this. So it would, and it's something I wanted to ask you, Afia, and so are you seeing an upswing from the market in asking for this kind of information, sort of strategic? As you said, you can project risks now through to the end of this century, so another 80 years or so. Are you seeing people are coming to you guys and saying they want this?
Yeah, there was definitely a first demand coming more from the supply chain side. I mean, obviously there you can, for example, we all remember when the Ever Given got stuck in the Suez Canal. That wasn't even a climate event, but just to understand the impact of disruptions. As you said, imagine that now, for example, with what's going on in Turkey. Imagine you have a customer there. Imagine a company from one day to the other just being destroyed to the ground, or production facilities. It's about, again, when we talk about that exponential risk and about how everything is linked, you cannot simply say, oh, this is not of our concern because this is the supplier side of the business that needs to take care of this. Everything is linked. In many cases, suppliers are also customers, or the other way around. So yes, this is one of the bigger things that we currently see, along with the next, let's say, subject that we are going to discuss. But okay. Yeah, absolutely. And also, again, maybe it wasn't a question that we put in the polling, but people, for example, that have a form of credit insurance, we now also see that the credit insurers are also taking this into account. So then we know at some point it's going to be an obligation to also take that into consideration when you are performing any type of risk assessment on companies.
And just staying with the credit insurance element for a moment. So is there a correlation or like an offset that if companies are demonstrating that they're being a lot more proactive to, like the things that you're showing here, is there a correlation like with the premium, or the flip side, if companies are not more kind of cyber or climate orientated, that their premiums are going up? Because is there a direct cost kind of in that area?
If it's not already the case, it will be. Depends, of course, also if companies, are regulated, etc. But yes, that is definitely a trend that we are starting to see.
Okay. There's a question here again from Martin. He's saying, can we get more information on the projecting of risks to the end of the century?
You will need to join my presentation at the conference for that one.
Aha! So you've got to come to Krakow in 3 weeks' time, Martin. But I think it
sounds a great idea, to be honest.
Please do. We'd love to see you. Yeah, I know you've been with us before. We'd love to see you. Give me a bell afterwards. And Peter Daniel makes a great point as well, I think. And we're looking at the layering up of the complexities here. Peter's saying about it's already difficult when you have countries like Lebanon, Argentina with local bank restrictions already, and that's been going on for decades. But now when we factor in these other things like, the maybe the cyber vulnerability and moving these transactions, the letters of credit or whatever it is, and of course you could then also factor on the climate elements as well to some of these countries too. You can see it's as we said right at the very beginning, this is like a multifaceted perfect storm, isn't it? There's just hundreds of things happening simultaneously. It's not just one thing. There's all these different aspects, all impacting every business every minute of every day. how often some 30 seconds or something? There was a cyber
Yeah,
attack.
it was every 39 seconds, correct? Yes.
Wow. Okay.
I don't
so
have any statistics in terms of like the events that we see on the screen with the slides. And up to Martin's point, if we look at, for example, the projections of risk, we actually acquired a company a couple of years ago, which is called RMS, and they're a leader in anything related to natural disaster risk, etc., and a bunch of other risks we'll talk about in a minute. And essentially what we're taking is each time that you hear about scientists saying we expect sea levels to rise with this and this and that, or with temperature increases, etc. I think 2023 is already the hottest year on average worldwide, which doesn't come as a surprise if you see, probably within summer each time we saw that heat records were scattered. So it's there are some real obviously things going on in terms of what we do for projections. So we take that, let's say, scientific information into account. We have, again, of course, artificial intelligence working on making that predictions about how is the world going to look like in 2100, with hurricanes becoming more, let's say, more frequent and also stronger and stronger. Right now, like category 5, etc., is definitely no longer an exception. What we expect in terms of earthquakes, etc., and there again, it's important to understand if you have a business within certain areas that you can expect more and more damages, increased in cost, etc. I mean, essentially, you can compare the situation as with COVID. If a company shuts down for several months because of damages, or again, maybe the bigger players can, of course, account for extra costs, etc. But maybe a smaller company doesn't have the bandwidth to overcome certain periods of time, or again, this could have a huge impact on payment delays, etc. So again, for us, it's a huge topic. We've now have an entire department working on both climate risk and ESG, which we'll talk about in a minute. And again, we see it more and more that it also is now an obligation to make sure that you take these types of risk into account.
I think there's just another thought as well, like in the shared service center world where most of us are coming from, there's a lot of requests from the senior management to that the shared service centers actually bring value to the business, right? And often this bringing value to the business is not just kind of monetarily, right? Like saving costs here and there, lean projects and all that kind of thing, which of course are important, but taking this message back to your managers, in 25 minutes from now or so, this is adding value to the business. Hey, did you know you can get this heat map projecting sort of 80 years forward? And it's kind of difficult now to put this genie back in the bottle. Now we know this information is available, and I didn't know till last night when we were going through these slides again together. I didn't know this kind of detailed heat map was around. So now this genie is out the bottle. It's it's kind of it's our responsibility now really to go back into the office and to say to our line managers, look, what are we doing about this? Do we have this? And here it is. So let's. We can't really ignore it because the consequences are horrendous. Yeah. So okay.
And also maybe if I may add to that, because again, obviously we're now talking about the customer side, but obviously you will be speaking to your to your colleagues at the supply chain side. This tool was actually developed to understand supply chain resilience. So there's actually a way to plot, for example, end customers, but also with suppliers and the suppliers of your suppliers, so that you can see the full or understand the full chain, and essentially see where, if some disruptive event would happen, what the impact would be, whether on your suppliers. But I'll be working very closely with the team to also see if we can do something similar for the customer side as well. Again, when we talked about that snowball effect, I'm really curious to see what the effects will be there.
And I'm just thinking, like, we have a very broad number of companies here. As you said, we've got people from pharma and various other, and I know we have a few people here from the retail side. So I think, are any of your sales and deliveries been impacted? If you're delivering food or drinks to high street stores, have there been incidents when you've not been able to do that because like perhaps in there's been like the fires in Greece, for example, or in California or other pretty well everywhere there's been forest fires this year. So you got examples of where your goods are not being paid because because of these kind of things, which is directly impacting the supply chain. I'd love to see a few more examples of that, please, on the chat. So, okay, so we go through to the next section, Afia?
Yeah, please.
Okay, coming up. So now we're talking about ESG, which is sort of this year's hot subject, I believe. Yeah. So, okay, back to you. So another voting question then on ESG. Mm-hmm.
10 more seconds, please.
Yeah, and also again, if we can have examples of, like, particularly the second part here, what are the ESG initiatives that are happening within the supply chain? It'd be interesting to see what that physically means, what's actually happening. Yeah. Okay, so both of them around.
I'm sharing the results now. Is it visible?
Lovely. 50-50 the first one, 56, a little bit over half on the second one. Okay, lovely. Okay, is that the sort of response you were expecting, Afia?
I had a very open mind when going into this session, so it's very interesting that we have 2 times the 50-50. Estra, I can still see the poll results. Okay, awesome. So this brings us indeed to the ESG bit, which is obviously closely related to the climate piece that we just discussed. So we spoke about 2006. If we go forward like 10 years or so, in 2015 in Paris, there was the UN Climate Conference. Actually, a couple months later, in April 2016, there were nearly 190 countries, as well as the European Commission, that signed the Paris Agreement at the UN headquarters in New York. And they were essentially putting forward a blueprint of realizing net zero emissions by 2050. And China was announcing as well that they would strive to be carbon neutral by 2060. So there is this consensus that sustainable development and climate change, as again we discussed in the previous bits, are really the key issues of our time. And again, it's not so much about what you do as a company, but it's also closely watching your employees, your customers, as well as your suppliers' behavior. We mentioned this a couple of times. This is something affecting us all. We all have that joint responsibility. And we know that large companies already have to comply with certain regulations. It is believed, again, that for SMEs, this will follow in the next coming years. We have the saying, if it storms in Paris, it rains in Brussels. So you know that if the bigger ones have to comply with it, eventually that will go through for the smaller ones as well. Banks and investment companies are already looking into this, and ESG ratings actually have a direct impact on the cost of capital and loans. And research has indicated that a high ESG risk actually decreases profitability. It decreases the real estate value, as well as the household wealth and asset performance. And at the same time, we've seen an increase in the cost of compliance and legal costs. And simultaneously, a low ESG risk is really known to decrease the cost of capital, so debt and equity sides, and it decreases the business risk and overall really increases the value of your business. So when we really talk about that sustainable development and that long-term vision. Again, there is also the shout out from credit insurance companies that companies soon will have ESG ratings that will affect their credit scores as well. So this is another thing that we see that is coming, that people should be aware about. And if you're not already looking into this, that again, this is something that you need to account for, especially for the next coming years. Again, really happy to hear both sides of the people speaking, or if you want to drop it in the chat, and then we can pick it up from there. Because again, I'm really curious, given it's a 50-50, so please fire away.
Martin?
Hi, it's Martin. Yeah, I have to say I'm in the same place. I was absolutely amazed that was 50-50. Given the importance, certainly in the UK trading businesses, I mean, where water retail, the importance of ESG, A, to us as an organisation as part of what we're doing, B, to our supply chain. I was really surprised that was 50-50, I have to say.
And who in just a general question, was something as Afi was talking, I was thinking, who is actually responsible for this in a company? Is there like a C-suite level? What's it called? ESG executive or something? And Afi, what's your who is there one person really responsible for all these risks, or are they broken down into climate and so on?
I think this is again one of those joint responsibilities, because we're talking about it's from a regulatory point of view, it's a reputational point of view. That's probably some issues with companies that they don't really know where the responsibility lies. I think this is probably somewhere joint responsibility again between credit teams and probably compliance teams, again depending a little bit on let's say the actual assets or faucet that we are looking at. But sorry, and there is something in the chat, into considerations. Yeah, okay. Yeah, exactly. So I really encourage people who voted, so please speak up or again, put something in the chat, because this is really interesting. And then I'm really curious to see how these, let's say, for example, if you have credit insurance, is this already something that you're aware about? Is this new to you? Are you aware of any initiatives? And this may well as be, for example, within your company that you see that the fleet is all of a sudden becoming electrical vehicles. Or, for example, what we see is that and this was also obviously a little bit with pre-COVID times, that we used to travel a lot, while now we are much more conscious of if we travel, is this really necessary? Can we do this over Zoom, over Teams? In some cases, obviously, it makes sense, for example, if you go and go out and visit customers, because that face-to-face thing is also something really critical. But I think we're becoming much more conscious about, let's say, the impact that we have. And frankly speaking, if we're not becoming conscious about it, then for sure, in the next couple of years, the government will make us become conscious about this. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's so that's something we talk a lot about in Callisto and our training and so on, is that governments will make all their noise, like Boris Johnson said a few years ago, Britain will be carbon zero by I think lunchtime the following day. He said, it was kind of, he'll say anything to placate voters at that moment in time, or he did. But the reality is that no government is really going to do anything themselves, but they're going to demand that companies respond to this, because it's only businesses really that can make this happen.
Sorry, go ahead.
Carry on.
No, I was going to say it's a bit tricky as well, because as you said with Boris Johnson, it's a good example. At the same time, we say to companies, you need to be more green, you need to reduce your carbon footprint. At the same time, are we ready to adopt this as a society? To give an example, in Belgium, for example, if you now build or renovate a house, we've seen our dependency from gas. We know everything with the Russia-Ukraine conflict, etc. So people are now encouraged, to find additional, like use a heat pump in the house, which runs on electricity. Then you're also encouraged to have solar panels on the house. Same thing for companies. You need to make sure that your employees, if they have a company car, it needs to be an electric vehicle. But obviously, then you need to make sure that your the network, etc., is able to take that additional demand in, and this is where we're struggling a little bit. Like, you can have at the same time say, this is where we want to go to, but everything needs to be ready in order to take in those changes. And I think there is probably a little bit of a discrepancy at the moment.
Yeah, and there's a measure now that is kind of, I think it's a global measure, and it's about sort of the carbon footprint that companies actually generate, and they have to fill out this questionnaire, and I think it's controlled. It's not controlled by Brussels, but there's like a global body that's controlling this, and it's becoming more and more mandatory that every company kind of reports on their individual carbon footprint, right? So, and there are financial penalties for this, many millions of euros or dollars if they exceed whatever the acceptable level is. So this is another risk element that's all connected, that there's more and more measures now are coming into businesses to really kind of show what their carbon contribution in the world. And as Afi was saying, there are some discrepancies, because if you think about some of the major freight companies that are delivering door to door, as far as they're concerned, as a company, they are probably doing the right thing. They may have electric vehicles or whatever else, but most of their drivers, or in many cases, their drivers are self-employed. So they're probably still driving 20-year-old diesel trucks or something. And because their wages are relatively low, they can't afford really to transfer to something greener, right? So that's one of the discrepancies. You know, the companies are saying, la, 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 yeah, we're doing perfectly, yet, you know, they're probably contributing even worse to the climate situation through their self-employed people. Yeah.
Yeah, and then at the same time, if we continue on the electric vehicle thing, what we also see is now that, and again, this is where we talk about the exponential risk, because everything again is linked. Is that if today, again, taking the example of Belgium, you want to order an electric vehicle, you know, there was this chip shortage, etc. If you now order a car, potentially you have to wait for like 14 or maybe up to 2 years time before you have the vehicle. Imagine you're doing that on a business to business case, that you buy something and you know you'll only get the goods in 2 years time. You know how much can happen in 2 years time. So again, how do you estimate that risk? Because there is some money that will already be put down, for example, to buy some cars for your fleet within your company. But what is happening over the next 2 years? At the same time, the company has already ordered the cars, but will the company or will the customer buying the cars even be still there in 2 years time? It's this where we say that everything is linked, and it's making everything so complex. So it's, yeah, really some curious times.
Okay. All right. So we've got 10 minutes left, so we'll move on to the next bit, which is also very interesting. And this is, I think that again, this is something that we can all take on board, right? So this is, so you explain what this is, and then we'll come back to it, Aoife.
Sure. I promised I was going to be a little bit of AI, and also because we are constantly asking the question like, okay, what can we, or measures can we take into account to be as predictive as possible? We know obviously we can capture information the moment it happens, but we try to be as predictive as possible. So this is where we, let's say, take news information into account. We know that news is available around the clock. We have thousands and thousands of news sources. We have it in every possible language, but unfortunately, we all lack the time, the resources, probably the language knowledge, and the funds to access all these news sources. And this is luckily where we can rely on artificial intelligence to actually do that work for us and make sure that we can consolidate those sources. So essentially what we'll do is take news events and turn them, or let them turn into what we call quantitative metrics. So this is a case I wanted to show you. I've anonymized it. It's a company that actually went into default in July this year. However, if you can see, so just to give you an idea, you will see the legend on the left-hand side. Any actual negative news is presented in red, and credit adverse news is presented in purple. Already in September of last year, the sentiment analysis that is performed on the news that is being published already picked up that there was a major event to happen. So we could almost predict it 1 year upfront, that there was going to be a major impact. This is one of the features that we really try to leverage, again, additional sources of information to increase our predictive analytics power. I don't know if this is already something you take into account if you're actively monitoring news, again, with the knowledge that, of course, if you want to take in as many news sources as possible, this takes time and money. So this is, again, a bit where I want to hear from the crowd, like, what are you currently doing to next to all the other risks that we currently discussed? What are you doing there? What other types of risk do you see, or methods that you see, or that you're currently undergoing? I see that Martin is doing something with, I don't know, Martin, if you wanted to speak up, because there are some.
Yeah, sure. We are doing this exactly as you've got on the chart. So so our partner who is doing our scoring actively monitors events that are or news events, and then we'll adapt the score to meet that monitoring. My only concern sometimes is the events can deteriorate the score when there's a natural explanation for the event, so you may have to do some sort of override to that. But I think this is really, really important to look at the news, to track the news, track the event, to track that within your credit risk strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for that comment. I think, I mean, in any case, there is always this, and luckily the bots cannot overtake everything. Obviously, there is always this human interaction where you say, okay, this is what we see. At least if we can have some of the news sources consolidated, but at least that way we can take it into account without going to too much troubles to go to all the different news sources. But yeah, there is indeed this let's say human factor that you also need to take in when reviewing all of this. Again, I think with all of these things that we've seen today, it is a matter of trying to make life a little bit easier, trying to capture as much as possible. Again, we call it exponential risk, or that risk 360 degrees. Yeah, again, I see that there is a question. How
Yeah,
can you
I think you're going to earn your money with that question, Afia. That's a belting question, that is. So
Oh,
the
okay.
one from Patrick, yeah.
Yeah. So how can you include company news, positive or negative, within an automated calculated risk score? That's a very good question. Maybe if we can have the slides back in full screen, if that's possible, Mark.
Yeah, can you just go back to full screen? Thanks, guys. Coming up.
There we go.
Yeah.
Awesome. So maybe it's a bit of a small print, but if you look at the purple chart, you see on the left-hand side that this is the credit sentiment score. So this is actually the score that we calculate based upon that news information. That way we turn it into a quantitative metric, and that way you can actually also have it within your scorecard. So imagine you have a scorecard going from 0 to 100. This could be one of those components where obviously you assign the weight that you want yourself. But this way you actually have a quantitative metric. And obviously now this is just one slide, but we do provide, let's say, recommendations when the risk is between certain brackets. And for example, 75 is a major disruption or a major critical event. So that way you could actually incorporate this. Oh, and Martin, that is a lot of.
There's, I mean, the chat will be shared afterwards. It will be circulated. But did you just want to?
Trying to support that. Really, I was just trying to support that commentary. Really, to me, it's about data aggregation, making sure that the data sources, aggregating them all together. It's exactly what you've got on the slide there. And then sentiment analysis is really huge for me. So utilize the sentiment analysis techniques from NLP now to try and evaluate the tone of stuff. And then the other thing for me, which we often don't see so much done, is keyword extraction, is really try to look for that within that analysis as well. And then obviously, to answer the point succinctly a little bit, and it's a great question, as you say, the weighting, assign appropriate weights for different types of news events. And then that will then give an impact score on that organisation. But it's a great question. I just put a few things that I would have done in the answers.
And I think one of the, again, keeping the theme of where we get involved, whatever job we do, collections, cash allocation, disputes, risk management, and so on. And if we hear something in the news, we don't have to wait for technology to say, oh, there's been an earthquake or some situation happening. If we hear something on the news when we're on the way to work in the car or whatever, and we think, yeah, we sell there, we sell products, or we have a factory there, or a customer's there, whatever it is. Don't assume that somebody else is dealing with it, right? I think it's our collective responsibility, right? Because as we've just demonstrated all the way through, the impacts on not doing these things are massive, right? And we all have a right or a responsibility to go to work and say, I heard this on the news. What's our strategy about this? If somebody was to call me and ask, what's my answer? So don't just leave it with somebody else. It's our collective responsibility, and this is what makes our job interesting. And one of the things we say in Callisto is that we are a profession, not a process. We are in this risk industry. This is all about us, right? So it's really important that we kind of connect these things up. Even if something's happening 10,000 kilometers away in India or wherever it may be, and it's connected to us, don't be afraid to say, right? I think that's really important. Yeah. So a couple of minutes left, Afia. Do you want to?
I just see that there are a number of questions in the chat. If it's okay, I'm going to follow up on that, because we literally only have 3 minutes left. Patrick makes a very fair point about how can you avoid fake news. We make the distinction between, for example, just data scrapping from different websites and using, you know, what we call the dedicated verified sources, being Financial Times, Reuters, etc. But that is a fair point. I mean, fake news is you know, especially on social media, etc. That's what we really try to avoid. But of course, yeah, that's where we constantly need to make sure that our systems are trained and that indeed we can avoid that type of information. For the other people, if it's okay, I've written down your names and then I'll be speaking to you individually. I see that there was a question from Sarka as well. I don't know if you're coming to the conference, but this is one of the things. For now, I try to keep it a bit high level because otherwise time really has flown by. But this is what I'll try to elaborate on during the conference as well.
Yeah, and that's a good question. And I think what you're saying there, Shark, is like there's all these things are happening, and they're all happening simultaneously. You know, and that's the that's scary, and it's exciting for us because this is what makes our job really come alive. So we've got just a few seconds left, so I'll just we'll just sort of wrap up now. The chat will be circulated, so everybody can see it. You'll have it by lunchtime today. The conference that Afia is referring to is our Credit Matters conference. It's in Krakow, October 11 to 13. We have a couple of places still available if you want to come. We would dearly love you to come and join us because we're actually having sessions on. So Afia is expanding on this, say, and actually as a presentation. We have sessions on ChatGPT and the risk of that. We are actually supporting a charity that's involved in climate change as well, and we're having a presentation on that too. So it's a very varied conference. Of course, most of it is on credit and order to cash, but we have these other elements that we're talking about here, you know, because we're actually kind of connecting the real world with our business world. So okay, so time is up. I want to say thank you very much. We actually had a record attendance. We had 70 people at our peak. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining us today. Afia, wonderful. Thanks a lot. We spent a lot of time on the prep and so on, and I really appreciate it. It's been a great subject. Great comments. Thank you very much. The chat's been flying through again for the last hour. All right. So Esther, behind the scenes, pulling all this together, as always, making it all happen. So once again, everybody, thank you so much indeed for being with us. We hope you enjoyed it. If you have any suggestions for other things we can do in the future, fire them in. We'd be glad to hear from you. In the meantime, we'll be back again very soon. In the meantime, take care, stay safe, God bless, and see you all. Thank you and goodbye. Cheerio.
Thank you. Bye-bye.